Please can I welcome everyone to this meeting of Cabinet on Thursday the 25th of September 2025 from the Walton Suite, Winchester Guildhall. The time is just after 11 a.m. My name is Councillor Martin Todd, Chairperson of the Cabinet and Leader of the Council. This meeting is live streamed from the Council's YouTube channel and the recording will also be available after the meeting. Subtitles can be switched on and advice on how to turn these on is set out online. Can everyone ensure mobile phones are on silent, and can I remind members to use their microphones? In the unlikely event that it is necessary to evacuate the building, the fire alarm will sound. Please follow all the instructions given to you by our team. Turning to the agenda, the first item is apologies for absence. I have no apologies for absence. The second is disclosures of interest. I need to declare that I have a disclosable pecuniary interest in respect of item number 5 on the agenda due to my additional role as a Hampshire County Councillor. However, as there is no material conflict of interest regarding this item, I have a dispensation granted by the Audit and Governance Committee that enables me to speak and vote on this matter. Councillor Porter.
Thank you. I'd like to make the same declaration. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other declarations of interest? No. Right. Next item is request from councillors to speak, and I have a request from councillors Lee, Godfrey and Bolton to speak on item 5 of the agenda. I'm assuming that's correct. The next item after that is public participation, and I have no requests for public participation. And now we move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is local government reorganisation, the final proposal for Hampshire and the Isle of Wight, pages 5 to 596 of the report. So this is a report that was considered at full council last night. Matthew Watson and David Blakemore have done a heroic job in providing us notes on the meeting that was held last night. And we can use these to inform our discussion to make sure that the issues that the council wanted us to consider will be covered. So to briefly introduce the paper, and we were all at full council last night, and there's probably a limit to how many times you want to hear me say the same thing. So it's the morning after the night before. I think we had a good and thorough discussion at full council, and I think full council and our councillor colleagues are clear on the majority view on the way forward. To recap, this isn't a process that we would have chosen. It isn't a timing we'd have chosen. These aren't the criteria that we would have chosen, but none of that matters. We have to decide whether to submit and what to submit. And as I said earlier, I would like to thank officers, particularly Matthew Watson and David Blakemore, for the heroic work in ensuring we have some draft minutes and notes of last night to consider this morning. And I would like to repeat the thanks I made at last night's meeting to Laura, Liz, Gareth and Jade and their teams for their staggering amount of work during the process. And all other colleagues have been involved as well, but they have done, to describe as heavy lifting doesn't do it justice. Now, it's important to note that no one proposed an alternative course of action at last night's meeting. There was majority support for submitting option 2, but there were some issues that were raised, particularly on the detail of the finances, and we should look at those while we go through. There are some other issues that belong, in some cases, at a later stage of the process, such as consideration of how we manage risk, how we factor the environment into future plans, how we address the challenge of a potential democratic deficit from reduced councillor numbers and larger authorities, of course, how we protect the mayoralty. And we can touch on that, I think, in our debate later on if Cabinet colleagues think there are particular issues they want to explore. Ultimately, there is no perfect answer to the challenge that we've been set. And there is no perfect analysis to decide between the options. It doesn't exist, it can't exist, and it certainly couldn't exist within the time we've had available to us. But that doesn't mean that we have the luxury of delaying or of failing to make a decision. We will be making a decision, and I think that decision should be to submit option 2. As the paper lays out, it's simple, balanced, and locally supported, particularly by residents in our district, and also incidentally by residents in East Hampshire. A coherent and balanced set of authorities for the mainland, strong local identity. It doesn't require any boundary changes, and councillors in this council have been clear that they don't want to see any boundary changes, ensuring that it is simpler to implement while configured to deliver better services and ensure devolved power with a community focus. So sensible, proportionate, place-based geographies, as the overall paper says, close enough to deliver responsibly and locally for our residents, big enough to protect and deliver the essential services we need. And if we don't respond, a failure to respond means that effectively we're endorsing merger either into a mega council with Basingstoke, one of the largest councils in the country, where, having spoken to colleagues in Basingstoke, although they love Winchester dearly, they don't think that it's right for us to be in the same authority, or merger with Basingstoke, merger with the New Forest. And neither of those are options that our residents support or that I think are correct. So we need to submit, I believe we should submit option 2, and I look forward to further discussion. So we have, I think, Councillor Lee, Godfrey and Bolton registered to speak, and I will take them in that order. So Councillor Lee, if you would like to come forward.
Good morning, Leader. Good morning, Cabinet, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I'd like to quickly again thank the Chief Executive Officer and the officers for working tirelessly under almost impossible deadlines. As I said, their effort is not in doubt. I've reflected on the debate last night, and unfortunately I remain unconvinced that the claim our preferred option is close enough to be local, big enough to stay strong. In reality, it perhaps is too far to be local and too big to be strong. However, I've accepted the dilemma. If we submit nothing, we lose any say in the MCGL decision process, and things may happen to us which we'll have no say in. But Cabinet, I think in terms on the subject of what to submit, as highlighted as a question for you this morning, I wonder if there's a compromise. And I say this because I think our submission to MHCRG can indicate that option 2 is our preferred option, the least worst case option, but perhaps prepared with a request for a pause. And I'd like to just rehearse some of the points I said last night, albeit rather fragmentedly. By doing that would allow more time for a more balanced quantitative and qualitative assessment of the facts. As we know, the wrong exam question, I believe, was set, the criteria was incomplete. And one of the key points I made last night was that a full life cycle climate biodiversity impact assessment should have been mandated. It wasn't, it was omitted. I think it's indefensible. And the same system driving climate crisis also drives the cost of living crisis. And UK 100, a cross-party network of ambitious councils, concerns underscores that threat. If you look at the option 2 as it proceeds, I really feel that the absence, and I know why, it wasn't mandated, a risk table was not created, risk mitigation perhaps I believe could have been done. And some of the issues, as I see them, whether it be neighbourhood governance guarantees for the New Forest Area Board, delegate budgets, service hubs, Southampton, New Forest, maybe in Winchester, Andover, Alton, environment and nature compact issues, 2 national parks and 1 unitary, risking housing, nature trade-offs, and then public servant and councillor workload balance, formal support ratios for casework and parishes. So I do believe that passing on an option 2 as a blueprint to our successors without a bit more work assuming it is selected by MHCRG without addressing the key uncertainties, carries too much jeopardy and costs for implementation work down the line. I think there are also too many moving parts, which a pause would help, which is obviously, as we know, it coincides with the mayoral authority, major bills and wider reforms. We're also acting in faith without a risk register. Even if not mandated, we should have created one. I really find it hard to find that Cabinet and the MLCRG will judge soundly without one. Wrong scale. As economist E.F. Schumacher argued, small is beautiful. Bigger is not always better. Oversized remote unitaries undermine localism, as we said last night, identity, democratic representation, and access to services. My residents are very fearful about the remoteness, fewer councils, less public servants, and poorer service delivery. The creation of a democratic deficit is manifest. So I think clearer mitigation is needed. So Cabinet, I'd also like to ask your views about the community support in terms of the consultation engagement. I believe it was poorly timed at the end of the summer school term and summer holidays. It's very unfortunate. Do we really believe the response rate can be treated as meaningful consent? Indicative, certainly. And then the fractured process, which we talked about again. 2 competing proposals have been sent to MHCRG. This leaves Whitehall civil servants with a strong hand to dictate the outcome, with possibly one option hardly debated in this council. I feel very uncomfortable about that. So I say, as I said last night, taking that all together, these concerns perhaps would justify a pause. Precedent does exist: Northamptonshire, Cumbria, Somerset, North Yorkshire, and recently Wealden. So Cabinet, please have a think about it. Please consider that compromise. I believe it will also help all Hants and Solent councils to reach a closer common view and mitigate the risks of creating these more remote, less democratic local new governance systems. We talked at length last night about the financial uncertainty as well, and I wonder whether more time might help that. I can't be certain about it, of course, but I believe there's a possibility. Without this, there is an enormous risk the biggest local government organisation in 50 years will become the biggest backward step for our communities, our most vulnerable and local democracy. I know we need to do it, but I just wonder whether there is a compromise or a middle way. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Lee. Councillor Godfrey.
Thank you and good morning. If I may offer the apologies to Councillor Horrell, who could not join us this morning, as she has an all-day commitment as a school governor. At last night's council meeting, it was made clear that the Cabinet had not been shown the detailed finance information that made up the forecast in this paper. This was somewhat undermined by the leader seemingly reading from one of those reports while responding to questions. Whether it is your astonishing lack of curiosity that bounds on dereliction of duty, or a refusal to be open with the information, I am left unconvinced by the lack of detail provided in this report. I do accept the leader's assurance that our officers, particularly Liz Keys and the finance team, have done an excellent job working closely with the many other councils to produce the information that is in this report, and I commend them for that. We do need to get the finances right, so the same high quality services that Hampshire residents receive now can be delivered in future. The net savings of £63.9 million per annum predicted in this report is almost certainly no better than guesswork. But you do not know how good it really is for our residents, as you and I have not seen the details that underpin this number. Hampshire County Council estimate that these proposals will deliver nearly £95 million less every year. Regardless of the accuracy of both these forecasts, we must not ignore such a big difference. Without seeing the detailed models, can the Cabinet afford to be so optimistic about the savings that can be delivered by these proposals? There's no breakdown to show the savings and costs by unitary and by option, either for implementation or ongoing budgets. How can you know that the new Mid-Hants Unitary Authority will be financially sustainable without more information? Without this relevant evidence, I do not think that you can express a clear preference for one of the options. I do accept that you will be reluctant to go against the views of our residents, who leant towards option 2 as their preferred outcome, even though the information presented during consultation was limited. You must be more cautious about the savings claimed. Better to under-promise and over-deliver than over-promise and under-deliver. We cannot even deliver half of a £3 million annual savings that the City Council need and they've been working on for the last 3 years. So how confident can you be without seeing the detail? We must not offer up a promise of savings to a government that is desperate to fill the ever-deepening hole in their own coffers, particularly when it is clear that we do not have any idea of what the financial future could begin to look like for a mid-Hants authority. We must remove care contracts from the savings assumption on page 361 of the report. And you must make a minor adjustment to the submission so that it is less optimistic and allows us to over-deliver in the future. I have one specific question from Councillor Horrell. What is the plan of action during a boundary review if option 3 is selected by the ministers and Newlands does not want to be moved out of the Mid-Hants authority? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Ball.
Good morning, Cabinet, and thank you for your time this morning. I'll be briefer than last night because I'm still without technology, so let's keep it simple. But just to reiterate some of the points that we discussed last night and that really concern me. As you know, I represent the Upper Meon Valley, a very rural community, and some of the clear concerns and optimism about local government reorganisation from that rural community largely were around. We always found two-tier government confusing, never knew who was responsible for what, so this definitely would help with that. The identity of a rural area and being part of a particular community was felt to be important in terms of the size of that unitary authority, and a concern around the democratic deficit that we talked about in terms of the number of councillors versus the population is also an important point. But of course, there was some alleviation of those concerns with the neighbourhood empowerment plans around that. But one of my big concerns, as we spoke last night, was the lack of granularity of data. And I've never been opposed to, in principle, the 5 unitary authority model because of what we learned from our residents. What I have always hated with a passion is the sort of trust me, I know what I'm doing type philosophy. And I felt there was a little bit of that, although I do trust officers, and I know you've all worked incredibly hard, not just in Winchester, but right across many of the districts to put these proposals together. But it's such an important decision that I felt that there needed to be, on our part as members, more of a theme of trust and verify, and make sure that we are collectively understand what the largely the assumptions are that go into this model. And I feel still that I'm not clear, and so I feel that the risk surrounding model data is quite large. and a lot of that comes out of the problems that we can see out of the Cumbria transition to Cumberland and Westmoreland, where overestimation of savings and underestimation of disaggregation costs is very likely to come out into the public domain shortly, because it's dragged on for over a year, and we're still to find out what those figures are. And if they'd been tremendously impressive and good, they'd be sung from the rooftops, and they haven't been. And I think this is hugely important, because finances matter, and even more so in the current climate. And they matter because they don't just represent numbers on the bottom of a balance sheet. They represent potentially a failure of service, and we all, I know, want to avoid that. So my big concern remains that we have a huge model risk that I caution everybody on. And I know, as you know, Councillor Todd, you said last night, you know, with social care costs and special educational need costs growing at the rate they are, all this will somewhat pale into insignificance at the end of the day. But I think the underlying programme has to be successful. And so I just urge caution. Yet I do accept, and for the reasons I've outlined, largely with the residents and my own feelings, are that both a 4 and a 5 unitary authority model should be considered. But I have concerns, as I've said, around how we have got there and the lack of information. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And while you're here, there's a high-level financial summary on pages 133 to 134. The detailed finances of the case are on pages 223 to 249 of the case, and the methodology is outlined on pages 412 and 400 to 421 of the report. I just wondered if there was a specific point you'd like us to discuss. And are you agnostic between merging with Basingstoke option 2 and merging with the New Forest and boundary changes? I'm also unclear. No, it's fine. I just thought I'd clarify. Thank you. Right. Well, we have a series of points, and I may refer some of these to colleagues. Councillor Lee raised the issue of, I think I understood him to say that he sees option 2, submission of option 2 as something we should proceed with, but suggested that we maybe add an extra letter or something like, or we request a pause, or that we don't submit option 2, but submit it with a pause. I think the government has given some feedback on delays. Is that right, Chief Executive?
Thank you, Leader. All the communication I've had from MHCELG during the week is that submissions must be made by midnight on Friday, and submissions after that date will not be accepted. So if we choose,
suggesting you make option 2 and request
Okay. I think, am I right, Chief Executive, that we have the opportunity to feed back to government through the consultation period after submission? Is that the process that they see?
yes, Leader. When we submit on Friday, and just in response to Councillor Lee's viewpoint, I mean, it may be that Winchester Cabinet were minded to pause. However, I believe other councils in Hampshire would submit, and that would mean a submission that then removed
option 2
from the table if you didn't intend to pursue that. If you wish to annotate the report to say option 2 but a pause, I think that would cause a significant issue within the partnership of the councils that we have now. However, you could send that letter later. MHCLG on receipt would then review all of the submissions received, so potentially 4 from our geography, will determine whether they meet the criteria as set, and all those that meet the criteria will be progressed to public consultation, which the government would run, and we anticipate that being a 6-week period ending potentially before Christmas, in order that the Minister may determine the geography in advance of the mayoral elections in March 2026. That's a national timeline for all councils who are on the devolution priority programme. As you said last night, Leader, we asked for an extension to make our submission in November, along with other 2-tier shire areas that are on that timetable, and that was declined. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. I mean, I think what's clear on that question of delay is that there's no case at all for delaying our submission. We have to submit tomorrow. We could, in theory, ask government to slow down the process from here onwards, but I'm not sure what point there is to that, because it wouldn't mean that we had any more time to do anything.
If I may insist again there, Leader, although we are submitting in September, the other councils are submitting in November, and all 2-tier shire areas are on a trajectory to become shadow councils in 27 and vested in 28, other than Surrey, of course, which is on an even more accelerated timetable. So you would be asking government to delay the whole process, and that would therefore prompt other councils to ask for a delay when the government direction for all 2-tier shire areas is shadow 27, vested 20.
In terms of the practicalities of implementation, actually what we need is certainty about which option we're going to be going with. I mean, ultimately we have an interest. I mean, I think it will be important to make a robust response to the consultation that the government's going to have, and that might be an appropriate moment to say, well, we've met the criteria, but we think it's too big. We could decide to do that, we might not. But actually, in terms of being able to concretely address the kind of risks that Councillor Lee has highlighted, the sooner we have certainty and a government decision and the ability to negotiate with government about the implementation of that decision, probably the better it's going to be for all of us, isn't it? We now come on to the question of finance, and I think there's a bit of muddle here. I mean, first of all, let's take the Cumbria. I think we've been absolutely clear that there are two separate considerations underway here, which is one is the deficit in social care and children's services, and the second is the financial implication of local government reorganisation. And it is absolutely crystal clear in every single area in the country, I don't know about every single area in the country, but all the ones I'm aware of, that local government reorganisation does not and cannot address the structural deficit. So it is completely possible that Cumbria's case was absolutely perfect in every way, and they would still be showing a huge deficit because of the fundamental problem that sits underneath it of the deficit overall in social care and adult and children's services. So the two things are not incompatible. But I think this point about optimism bias is quite a useful one to address. So, Ms. Keys, do you have any perspective on optimism bias?
Yes, thank you, Leader. We, as part of working up the savings that were possible and the implementation costs from LGR, we factored in percentage increases in the implementation costs, the one-off costs and the disaggregation costs, as well as adding 25% for optimism bias on the implementation costs to reflect the risk of delivery, because there are so many unknowns and we are at a very early stage. So that's hopefully some comfort to Cabinet that we've considered that risk in working up the figures, both on the savings and the cost side of that.
Thank you. So we have, in terms of the estimations, we have made the assumptions both of the likely savings and the likely upfront cost more, shall we say, cautious than the sort of bottom-up estimations might have led to. That's very reassuring. Thank you. One of the points that's being touched on is modelling of the different councils, and I believe that that work has been done. Am I correct in understanding that?
So just to clarify, this process that we've gone through is part of an options appraisal process, and it was producing comparative figures to look at the different options to take forward. We were very clear as Section 151 officers that this could not be an exercise in forecasting the financial outcome of individual authorities. So we used existing budgets at today's prices, and that's been used in the modelling of all the options going forward. But there are many uncertainties from here on in, not just around the impact of LGR itself, but the impact of council tax harmonisation, uncertainty around financial settlements going forward, and of course we've got the Fair Funding 2.0 review coming forward, which could have significant impact on business rates. So because of all of those things, it's impossible at this stage to be looking at what the financial sustainability of individual unitary authorities in the future would be. So just to bring it back and reiterate, this is comparative information to guide you through this options appraisal process. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, Section 151 officers being careful people, the thorough people, will obviously have looked at the county figures for 5 unitary model and wanted to understand them. Now, we haven't made this part of our case because we're not arguing against the county model in our proposal, so it's not part of the proposal. We're arguing for our case. But can you tell me whether any work was done and how it was done?
Yeah, of course. So the case that the County Council worked up with East Hampshire District Council, the figures in that were available to us as we were working up our modelling. So when there was quite a stark difference between the costs and savings of a 4 mainland unitary model, the Section 151 officers did an exercise to understand why that was and which assumptions were different between the County Council and East Hampshire District Council model and our own 12 council model.
Coming out of that, you remain, shall we say, confident in the modelling approach that we've taken and possibly slightly less confident in the county's one, or will you not comment on that?
Yes, collectively the Section 151 officers, having done that analysis, were confident that the figures that were in our model were in the right ballpark. As I say, we're not looking at definite numbers. We're not saying this is how much the savings are going to be, but they were in the right region and we could explain the difference.
So we're talking about the Section 151 officers of Basingstoke, Hart, Rushmore, Test Valley, Winchester, New Forest, Fareham, Gosport, Portsmouth, St Pearson actually, Havant and the Isle of Wight have examined those figures and remain confident in what's in front of us. Presumably the only council in Hampshire to have qualified accounts there, which is East Hampshire, their former 5-1 officer has looked at them as well, and the council with the biggest deficit in the country has also had a look at them as well. Okay, but came to different conclusions, but that is quite reassuring. So we're talking about 3 upper tier authority 151 officers, and is it 9, 8, 9? I think it was 9 actually.
No.
And 9 district 151 officers have gone through the figures and reassured themselves that our financial assessments are on a robust basis.
Yes, we wanted to understand the differences between the two, and we reassured ourselves that the figures that we were supporting could be explained, the differences could be explained.
Thank you very much indeed. That's very reassuring. I think the last issue that was raised in public discussion, and there was one point that was raised last night that we didn't talk about, which was about the mayoralty, was about Newlands. And in terms of So there's two processes that have been touched on that might impact on Newlands. I think in our paper we've made reference to an Boundary Commission review, Principal Authority Boundary Review, and that is a defined process where by law the Boundary Commission for England has to consult, I think, with the communities in question as part of the process, and it needs to be initiated by somebody, and at the moment it hasn't been. The second part of it is the boundary changes that would be done as a consequence of option 1A, where the government has outlined a process where that will be done through statutory instrument or through the order that defines the new authorities. And as I understand it, the consultation step in that is presumably the government's consultation between November and January, and that's it. And if they then decide to go ahead, they write it in the bill and it's done. So the consultation step, as far as Newlands is concerned, will be to respond to the government's consultation. Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah. But Newlands is not included in option 1A.
No, Newlands is included in option 1A.
Oh, is that changed?
Yeah. So it's the only parish that is up for discussion in the Winchester district. Everywhere else is out and is not being proposed by anybody. Now, there is also a step, I think, where the government is required under the 2008 Local Government and NHS Act, Public Involvement in Health Act. There we go. I think, are they required to show the proposals to the Boundary Commission for England, or is it just an option that they have?
They would be required.
So that is another thing that may happen, which is that they'll show the proposals, all 4 proposals that are likely to be submitted to the Boundary Commission for England, and they will also make comment. That's a slightly unknown factor in terms of how they may respond. I mean, they could end up saying something completely different altogether, but that's for later.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay. The other thing which was touched on was preservation of the mayoralty, which we didn't talk about at full council last night, although it was raised. Are there process options for that? I mean, we don't, I think as we're all aware, there is one council, which probably should remain nameless, that managed to lose its mayoralty. Rochester, I think, won't remain nameless. Rochester lost their mayoralty and city status. I've made it very clear that that's not happening as long as I'm alive and breathing for the Winchester City Council. Just because it is an issue that's been raised. I'm not sure it affects this submission, but maybe you could provide some perspective.
Absolutely, yeah, that's an issue we're acutely aware of. It's one that's also shared with Portsmouth and Southampton. We've already had some preliminary legal advice on that. We have somebody in the legal team who has some expertise in this previously. We will be seeking a KC's opinion on this, and the issues that arise from this we are addressing. There's the option of charter trustees. There's potentially the option of transferring to any newly created parish council, or potentially it being attached to a wider unitary. But as I say, we're still at a relatively early stage on that. But it is an issue we're very much on top of.
So that's useful to understand. So there is the absolute land grab option of saying that the central authority becomes Winchester City Council, and the mayor of Winchester then becomes the mayor for a somewhat wider area than currently. There is the option of charter trustees within the footprint, so the councillors within the Winchester district area of the new unitary then choose a mayor of Winchester, and then there is the option of a town council, of us transferring city status and the mayoralty to that council in the way that has been done in Chichester, where you have Chichester District Council and Chichester City Council. And City Council is a parish or town council and has the mayoralty, the historic mayoralty. That's Newbury is the same, and Newbury has a historic mayoralty transferred. When they got rid of Newbury District Council, they transferred to Newbury Town, I think. Okay. I think that addresses the points that have been raised. There are some other issues such as democratic deficit, but I think that will be arguments for a later stage in the process. But I think we've covered all the issues. Cabinet, does anybody else have any questions? Councillor Porter.
Is there any reason for not including the words option 2 in the headings of the pages where we describe the financial state for option 1? Because actually when you get to option 2, it says the projected savings for option 2 are identical to those for option 1. And I just wonder if you just pick up on the page for option 1, and then it's got option 3 a little later on, whether it would add to the understanding of the public about what is actually there. That's the first question. Do we go through all three, or do you want me to?
Go.
The next one is, I think this is quite a difficult one, and you may choose not to answer this, but what is, in your opinion, prompted the two authorities to seek alternative advice? Because up until that point, all 15 authorities were on the same trajectory, and this has certainly added a level of complication that wasn't originally expected. And also, we've referred many times to the county deficit. And what will we be doing to highlight that in our response, either now or at some stage during the next few months?
Thank you, Councillor Porter. There's three good questions. I think in terms of making major changes to the document, I think it's possible that civil war might break out in Hampshire, which, given that the Royal Navy is headquartered in Portsmouth and the British Army has got its headquarters in Aldershot, even though we do have Worthy Down, I'm not entirely sure we'd prevail in that particular battle. So no, I think it would add clarity. I think with 1 day to go before the final document is submitted, it's a very good point, but I'm afraid it's too late. I don't think I fancy providing that feedback.
And also, this paper is actually for the government to read, rather than, and they will be able to see it. It may provide more clarity for the public, but
I think that's possible. And actually, one of the things we understand from other places is that, and for example, we're expecting at some point a visit from MHCLG. The dialogue with government doesn't end now. What happens tomorrow is that the document locks and goes in and becomes our public case. But there, I'm sure, will continue to be discussions with government and potential to clarify issues as we go forward. But the case doesn't change. In terms of why the two authorities sought different advice, it was never entirely clear from what they said. In the end, I just have to assume personalities and politics. And I would say politics with a small p. I'm not necessarily down to whether that's councillors or, in one case, officers that were driving that. But I can't really comment. Suffice it to say that maybe they found a collaborative approach to working somewhat harder than the other authorities, but that's really a question for another place. I think your point about the county deficit is a good one, and we've talked about that in the past. Again, the current plan is that there's a single letter submitted, and it's going to be extremely difficult to make adjustments to that. But I think the actual fundamental point of wanting to remind colleagues that there is this insurmountable financial hole that needs addressing is a good one. And I mean, we will take that back to people. Again, I don't think there's huge hunger for significant changes right now. And it is something that is touched on. I mean, if you know,
My main concern is that obviously it's a conversation that happens at the county council, and I'm declaring that, you know, we were there at the county council meeting and that was raised yesterday. But actually each of the authorities is going to have to take the challenge of this. This isn't a conversation to send in with a letter, but it is certainly, it feels to me, a conversation that we should be having all the time, so that we don't yeah, it's easy to ignore it, but it shouldn't be ignored. And
No,
the
absolutely.
DSG grant is huge, which is
Yeah, I mean, of the
unsupported.
2 billion gap in the finances in the next 5 years. I mean, I remember when we used to give the Conservatives at Winchester a hard time for having a £19 million gap in the next 5 years. This makes me feel quite nostalgic, really. 2 billion pound gap in the next 5 years. It's an unimaginably large amount of money. And as you say, I think when I calculated that 2 billion figure and challenged officers at the county about it, it was 500 for the DSG gap, and now I think we're predicting that to be 700. So I mean, it is just, the figures are out of this world, and no reorganisation can address that.
And their 151 officer said actually it affected their cash flow, that DSG failure. So the cash flow is a very important part of this conversation, long term, particularly if that money doesn't get paid back by 2028.
No, that's a very fair point, which is that what the government has said is that you don't need to charge it the 700 million or to 500 million or however much it's going to be to the books, but you do need to fund it because all the costs that are sitting in that 500,000 have been paid out. So that is a hole or a pressure on the level of free reserves, usable reserves across the county, and I know that's a major concern to officers. I mean, if you look at page 134 of the report, it does talk about the scale of issue in terms of the deficit, but I think it is a fair point because we have, during the process, we have always been clear, and we were clear in our March submission, which was the sort of preliminary submission, that this was a huge issue. And I will take that back and talk to colleagues about how is there a way of taking a nice approach on that on the way forward, possibly even a reference in the cover letter. We'll talk about that. Any other questions? Steve.
Sorry, thank you, Leader. I do answer to the name Steve as well as Councillor Crimoyson. Just want to explore a little bit the area of the financial modelling. For my sins in my life prior to being a councillor, which seems like a lifetime ago, I was quite heavily involved in some work on financial forecast modelling rather than financial modelling. So I'm interested, and there's been a lot was made last night about, you know, the lack of detail and all that sort of thing behind, you know, numbers. So the question is around the financial model. To what extent are the models, if you like, proven? The models that are behind the numbers, to what extent are they proven and to some extent endorsed by the MHCLG? And to what extent do they look like they're standardized models so that we can be comfortable that even if they're not 100% accurate, they are at least giving a consistent directional steer that means that the outputs are actually really useful?
It's a very helpful point to degree. To a certain extent, if everybody's using a consistent modelling basis, then actually you do have a basis for comparing. Ms. Keys.
That is a very good question. And sadly, the government doesn't provide a model and a framework. It's up to councils to determine the best way to model the impact of LGR. Obviously, we used outputs and models that have previously been used for LGRs. I think it was 14 previous cases we used. And as each case goes through, you hope that there's some learning and some refining as that happens. So we looked at data from across all of those and we brought costs up to today's prices in order to determine some assumptions to feed into our model. But I would just reiterate that we used that top-down approach, but used a bottom-up approach to verify that so that we could meet in the middle and come up with average savings. And then we looked at how we'd allocated those savings across those savings subheadings and said, does that look reasonable? So there is no set model. It would be lovely if there was a process, a particular model to use. But as a collective of 12 councils, we at least had 12 Section 151 officers to be able to look at that and say, does it seem reasonable?
Thank you. And that include upper tier authority 151s and lower tier authority 151s. So in that respect, helpful. And I believe that KPMG, the consultants we used, have used similar methodology for successful proposals to government in the past. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And they presented to 151 officers some assumptions that they had pulled together from their previous experience. And then they were open to challenge from us around how appropriate that was for the Hampshire model that we were putting forward.
Thank you very much indeed. And I suppose the other point to make is that in terms of the basic figures that we use that underpin it all, there is a shared data set across all 15 authorities. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is correct. So all councils, including colleagues at East Hampshire District Council and the County Council, use the same template to capture the current cost of services. And we agreed all the principles between us around how that should be input.
Thank you very much indeed. Any further questions? Any debate? Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Leader. I chose not to speak last night because I thought I would just keep my comments for today rather than repeating it. But for me, in many ways, this is rather a sad occasion, a bit of a bittersweet occasion. This authority has been part of my life since 2008. The date when I was first elected. It seems an awful long time ago now. And I have seen many changes since that time. Some good, some not so good. I particularly haven't enjoyed the way that local authorities have been starved of cash over those years. And I've seen at first hand how we have struggled to find savings year on year. And yet, in spite of this, we've been able to continue to keep our grants programme open. We continue to build and provide council homes. We've won the accolade for #1 district council for our work on climate change. And we continue to strive to offer the best services that we possibly can for our residents. But I accept that something needs to change. And what we are being asked to do today is to submit our preferred option into government so that our proposal, the one that the majority of our residents want, is on the table to be considered. Did we ask for such a change to be made? No. We didn't. It has been imposed upon us by central government, who at the same time made it very clear that if we didn't come up with a viable solution, then they would decide who we merged with. So even though I have reservations about how this is all going to pan out, particularly with the loss of local accountability, decision making potentially being taken further away from our residents, and the wishes of residents within our district having to compete with other areas, the government has left us with little choice but to come up with the most palatable solution. So from my point of view, it is so much better to be part of that process and come up with a solution than allow the process to dictate the outcome for us. And a lot has been said last night about this, but we shouldn't forget that this has been and continues to be a hugely unsettling time for our staff. This whole process has led to a tremendous amount of extra work and strain on top of carrying out all the necessary things to run a council as business as usual. And it is to their great credit that they have remained enthusiastic and committed to ensuring the council continues to provide the best possible services to our residents across the district. And of course, this uncertainty will just continue until we know the shape of our new council. And so they will need help and support during that time. And I think we should all be aware of that and remember that fact. So whilst I have a lot of reservations about what we're being asked to do, I do believe that option 2 is the best option for us. I've sat on a unitary in a former life. I've been involved in local government for many, many years since before I came to Winchester, and actually being part of a unitary isn't so bad. There are lots of positives that we can take to that. So that is, for all those reasons, that is why I'm supporting option 2 set out in the recommendations today. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Councillor Reach.
Thank you. And I find myself in agreement with a lot of the speakers today, both members of Cabinet and visiting councillors. I made a strident and somewhat intemperate speech on the 19th of March at Council about this process, and it was actually linked to a very similar point that Councillor Bolton made, which was the democratic deficit that I think is in this process, but primarily about the unparished part of Winchester Town and what that means for residents here. What we've got is we've had a government that's done some vibes-based analysis, who knows, some woo-woo to come up with this incredibly transformational policy. Since that time, I think we should be proud of the work we've done to put a bit of science behind the figures. I'm convinced they are only comparative figures. You know, this is not about saying that it is going to be precisely X pounds and Y pence on this date, but it's about a comparative analysis of each of those options. So I think option 2 is the best that we can do, to borrow Councillor Lee's words. You know, it's the least worst option. But I think we do need to remember, if we don't do this, you know, we surrender control of this process to the Secretary of State. And not wishing to denigrate the member for Streatham and Croydon North, but I suspect he probably doesn't personally have that granular level of detail and knowledge of the Mere Valley, for example. So let's be clear, if we don't do it, you know, we're handing control over to the Secretary of State, I think by virtue of the Act, which Mr. John mentioned before. And that's not a comfortable position to be in at all. So I'm with Councillor Thompson and most others. I think we have to go ahead and we have to stick with the option 2 that's in the paper, even though it might well be the least worst option.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Becker.
Thank you. And like others, I'd like to start by acknowledging the high level of transparency and the continued updates that we have received throughout this process. The commitment by officers and by you, Leader, to keeping members and residents informed has been invaluable, especially given the complexity and the pace of the situation that we've been facing and the uncertainty that, as Councillor Thompson just mentioned, that our officers are now facing in terms of their continued employment. So I'd like to thank them. But to the matter at hand, similar to Councillor Reach, I've also spoken on this topic previously and said, and I continue to feel, this is not a situation that we wanted to be in. The timing is not of our choosing, and the process has been driven by central government, not by us. But we're here and we must respond. Not submitting a proposal isn't a viable option. If we don't act, as Councillor Reach has said, decisions will be made for us without our input and without regard for Winchester's unique needs and priorities. And that's why, again, least worst option, I support option 2. It's pragmatic, it's strategic. It reflects real geographic and economic connections, shared infrastructure, and a manageable population size. It allows us to build on existing partnerships and preserve Winchester's voice in shaping our future services. It's not perfect, none of the options are, but it is the best available path to protect our identity, ensure effective service delivery, and to maintain democratic accountability. It gives us a seat at the table rather than leaving us on the menu. We don't like the circumstances, but we can still shape the outcome. Submitting a proposal is not an endorsement of the process, but it is a defence of our community's interests. Winchester deserves governance that reflects its character, responds to its residents, and plans for its future. So, as much as we don't like it, we need to move forward with clarity, unity, and purpose, and option 2 is our opportunity to do that.
Thank you very much indeed. Councillor Lerney.
Thank you, Leader.
The environment is this council's top priority, and we share Councillor Lee's concerns about reorganisation. However, I think we have to recognise that the environmental impact of any of the options under consideration cannot be predicted at this point, as they will be determined by elections, not just for the new unitaries, but the mayoral election. While this council may have embedded environmental action and standards for a time through, for example, the local plan, these can be overturned by our successors, and this is of course the case even without local government reorganisation. We are, after all, a democratic organisation. Who is elected and the choices they make will also impact on the finances. As has been said, we've modelled the scenarios, but the assumptions underlying the financial case are while there are opportunities for service transformation, services will not be axed altogether, but it is possible that a new council may choose to do so. They may also provide additional or improved services at extra cost. We can't predict what will actually happen at this point in time. But despite the risks, like Councillor Bolton, I am supportive of unitarisation. Pretty much everyone in this room has experienced the frustration involved in the split of responsibilities between the City and County Council, and had to sort out the confusion of residents who don't know which council is responsible for sorting out their problems, and sometimes it's multiple. There has to be change in local government in Hampshire. The County Council is going bust, and if we weren't having unitarisation conversations now, we would, on the evidence of what's happened elsewhere, be being forced into it in an even shorter timescale when Hampshire put in a Section 114 notice. I want to see a unitary which is financially viable, but we do understand that for all options, including the county one, this will be dependent on government action on council finances. What we need to do is have a new council which is close to residents, responsive to their needs and reflective of their interests. I think the idea of a continuity county council with Basingstoke as its largest centre, as proposed by Hampshire, is the worst of all options, and it is not supported by our residents. I am confident that option 2 is the best of all the feasible alternatives on the table for our residents within the limitations the government has set, and will be supporting that today. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Lerney. And thank you everybody for the comments that you've made today. I think Councillor Thompson put it well. It is a bittersweet moment. We have all of us around the table, officers and councillors alike, dedicated a large part of our life to making Winchester City Council the strong and effective council that it is, that it delivers for our residents. And inevitably, this kind of step into the unknown is one that feels hard. Last night we had a good debate at full council. A wide range of issues were raised. There was particular concern about some of the details of the finances, and although not very detailed concern about the details of the finances, it was fairly high level, and we have discussed those today, and I would like to thank Ms. Keys, the 151 officer, for her considered and professional response to the issues that were raised, and actually I think providing a great deal of reassurance to Cabinet colleagues that we have a robust financial assessment in front of us as far as is possible, or rather a comparative viability assessment in front of us, and that we are taking robust decisions that have been heavily scrutinised by finance officers across almost all the authorities in Hampshire. So that is an important point. The process, although this stage of the process ends tomorrow, the process overall doesn't. And I think there are important points that have been raised, both about the overall gap in financial viability and the democratic deficit, are two particular ones where we will need to keep up our advocacy to make sure we end up with the best possible solution as we move forward towards potential implementation. I don't think we can delay. We have to make a decision and we have to put something forward. I have not heard anyone put forward an alternative to submitting option 2. And indeed, when we sought an indicative vote, or rather when councillors last night asked for an indicative vote and one was taken, it was very clear that the majority of council colleagues support the submission of option 2. So that is what I suggest we do. I won't rehearse the case again, but within the constraints that we've been set, within the timing that has been set, it is the best option on the table. As it says in the paper, it's close enough to deliver responsibly and locally for our residents. It's big enough to protect and deliver the essential services we need. And so I would propose that we support the recommendations in the paper in front of us, and let me recap what those are. The first is that we review the views of council about the submission, and I think we've done that, and I think we've gone as far as we can go with that and addressed the substantive points that have been raised. The second is to approve the full proposal to Government Appendix 4, including the primary support for option 2 within the proposal for submission to government by the 26th of September 2025 deadline. Third is that there is going to be a redrafting of the document that we've got in front of us. For legal reasons, option 3 can't be described as option 3, but has to be described as option 1A, which probably gives a flavour of quite how joyful this process has been over the last few months. However, that is being done, and a version that describes option 3 as option 1A is being prepared by our colleagues in Basingstoke. And note that council has agreed, as they did last night, that in event of minor changes being necessary to the proposal, and there will be, for example, possible adjustments as to who's supporting which option and other such things, provided they're agreed by all 12 councils, that I may, in consultation with the Chief Executive, be authorised to agree such amendments on behalf of Winchester City Council. Cabinet, are those proposals agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you very much indeed. Since that is the last item of business at this cabinet, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much.